Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I'm Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, good afternoon to you.
Hello Tanvi, it's 11:30 a.m. here in London. We're at the House of Commons for the UK's Budget Day. Coming up in the next half an hour, we'll tell you about the British budget. We'll also take you to Super Tuesday results in the United States and get the latest from the Middle East as well. First, the headlines.
In a major boost to Indian Navy, second naval base INS Jayu commissioned in Lakshadweep. Multi-role Seahawks squadron to be commissioned later today. Former Pakistan Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was hanged 44 years ago after being convicted of murder, did not get a fair trial, rules the country's Supreme Court. British Finance Minister Jeremey Hunt presents the Red Box at number 11 Downing Street to set out the government's plans for tax and spending in the spring budget. And Trump-Biden dominate Super Tuesday contests as they march towards a rematch. Reportedly, Nikki Haley plans to exit Republican presidential race. In a major boost for the Indian Navy and India's security infrastructure, the Naval Detachment Mini-Koi was commissioned as INS Jayu on Wednesday. The new full-fledged naval base was commissioned by Navy Chief Admiral R. Hari Kumar at Mini-Koi in Lakshadweep Islands. The Navy will deploy some of its assets in the Mini-Koi island and will also base personnel there permanently, which was not the case earlier. The event marks an important milestone in the Navy's resolve to incrementally augment security infrastructure at the strategically important Lakshadweep Islands. INS Jayu is the second naval base in Lakshadweep after INS Dweep Rakshak in Kavaratti. Mini-Koi is the southernmost island of Lakshadweep, 215 nautical miles southwest of Kochi. Besides, in another display of India's maritime prowess, the Indian Navy will commission the newly inducted MH60R Seahawk multi-role helicopter later on Wednesday at INS Garud in Kochi. The Seahawk squadron will be commissioned in the Indian Navy as INAS 334. The helicopters are a part of the 24 aircraft FMS contract signed with the US government in February 2020. The helicopter is designed for anti-submarine warfare, anti-service warfare, search and rescue missions, medical evacuation and vertical replenishment. The induction aligns seamlessly with the Government of India's visionary goal of ensuring security and growth for all in the region. Indian Navy continues to display its grit to provide assistance to several merchant vessels in the Western Indian Ocean. In view of attacks or mishap recently, the Indian Navy swiftly responded to a drone strike on a Liberian-flagged commercial vessel in the Gulf of Aden on Tuesday. INS Kolkata promptly responded and rescued the Liberian vessel. It was deployed in the region for maritime security operations. This incident came amid concerns over the safety of commercial vessels in the Red Sea due to the attacks by Houthis. The first edition of Naval Commanders Conference of this year is also underway in hybrid form. Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh embarked at sea on Tuesday to witness the Indian Navy's ability to conduct twin carrier operations. During the inaugural session, both the aircraft carriers showcased their ability to safeguard India's maritime interests. The conference witnessed discussions on enhancing the tri-service synergy and readiness in the defence of the nation and mull over the roadmap for Indian Navy in the current geopolitical scenario. Staying in Asia, Pakistan's Supreme Court ruled on Wednesday that former Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was hanged 44 years ago after being convicted of murder, did not get a fair trial. Bhutto, the founder of the Pakistan People's Party, now run by his grandson and former Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, was hanged in 1979 after a trial under the military regime of late General Zia-ul-Haq. On to the UK now. British Finance Minister Jeremey Hunt is set to unveil his spring budget today. My colleague Ollie Barrett is stationed at Westminster, London, and he gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. So Ollie, what are we expecting in today's budget?
Well, Tanvi, as you say, in less than an hour from now, the Finance Minister Jeremey Hunt is expected to get to his feet in the House of Commons, and we expect that he will offer tax cuts to voters as part of the UK's spring budget. Despite the fragile state of the UK's public finances, Rishi Sunak's government is trying to provide the respects to Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party. But many economic institutions say they've already gone too far slashing taxes given the state of the public finances. DD India's Stuart Smith reports from London.
UN said cutting taxes while the UK already wrestles with underfunded services was not a good idea. Other economists made similar warnings.
I think you can see why the UK government will be under pressure to cut taxes. It's increased them a lot since 2019. It looks like a record-breaking parliament in terms of tax rises, and it's pushing the tax burden in the UK up to levels we've not seen here before. So tax cuts would be nice to have, and they certainly can help boost growth. The problem is that tax cuts generally involve you getting less revenue, even if they do boost growth, and therefore they will require spending cuts to pay for them.
The IMF warns that lost revenue would be better retained and spent on some of the UK's most cash-strapped institutions, like hospitals and schools. It also suggests that money could be put to good use investing in ailing infrastructure and the climate transition. But bearing the brunt of cuts over the last decade has been local councils, half of whom said last week they're on track to go bankrupt within 5 years without serious funding reform. A third say they'll cut funding to parks and leisure. Another third say they'll have to cut spending on arts and culture. What the Chancellor announces on Wednesday, though, may be moot. The government might only have months left in power.
The history of UK elections shows us that we certainly shouldn't be surprised if the first 12 months after election sees pretty big tax rises, and quite often tax rises that we didn't hear about in the winning party's manifesto.
But the opposition Labour Party has largely kept its options open for now as to how it would budget the economy, though it may have to avoid traps left by the outgoing government. Its campaign so far promises more investment and better funded public services, like the IMF recommends. But the question of specifically which taxes will pay for that isn't yet public. Stuart Smith in London, reporting for DD India.
Looked at a fresh batch of corporate earnings, perhaps attracting their attention more than the budget itself. When it comes to exactly what we can expect in the budget from we do have a bit of detail more of a direction of travel here. We do expect there will be a cut to national insurance. We do expect that there will be an extension of a windfall gas firms as well. We expect some changes for so-called non-dom tax residents here in Britain. Very who are we also expect to hear some detail from restrictions on public spending in future years to come. That is how to pay for some of those tax giveaways we we expect him to set out in less than an hour from now. We also know what the opposition Labour Party think about all of this. Overnight, they've been describing this as a scorched earth budget. They've been talking about the Conservative Party's record of what they call economic failure. They talk about Rishi Sunak's government burning the house down. All of this comes in the context of an upcoming general election here in the UK. The government trying to restore its political chances ahead of that election whenever it comes. It's a busy day in Westminster. We've got protesters on one side, lots of tourists on the other. Jeremey Hunt will be on his feet in the House of Commons in less than an hour from now at around 12:30 GMT in the House of Commons just behind me. Moving on to the Super Tuesday primary in United States, and what we saw over there was former President Donald Trump sweeping to victory in statewide nominating contests across the country. Donald Trump won the Republican votes in a dozen states, including delegate-rich California and Texas, brushing aside former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, his lone remaining rival for now at least, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Her only win came in Vermont. Republicans have overwhelmingly supported Donald Trump so far, despite facing a litany of criminal charges.
They call it Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. This was an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time. We've watched our country take a great beating over the last 3 years, and nobody thought a thing like this would be possible. We wouldn't have Russia attacking Ukraine. We wouldn't have Israel being attacked. Iran, as you know, was broke. When I was running things, they were broke. They didn't have money for Hamas. They didn't have money for Hezbollah. We had no inflation. Inflation is destroying the middle class.
Joe Biden also did well for the Democrats, and all of that sets up a historic rematch in November's general election, despite low approval ratings for both candidates. DD India correspondent Kate Fisher reports from Washington, D.C.
Well, Super Tuesday's often seen as the pivotal day in the presidential primary season, but this year it felt more like predictable Tuesday as Joe Biden and Donald Trump continued their dominance of the Democratic and Republican races, respectively, depriving the elections of the usual suspense. Both men overwhelmingly won their primary contests, continuing their inexorable march towards their party's nominations, and so a rematch for the White House come November. Describing his victory, Donald Trump said it was an amazing day and that there'd never been anything so conclusive. But during his remarks, he didn't mention his remaining rival in the Republican race, former US Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. And the results will be a major disappointment for her, though she did secure the state of Vermont, depriving Trump from a clean sweep. She's always insisted that she would stay in the race until at least Super Tuesday, and it does seem increasingly unlikely that she can continue her campaign for much longer. But she did score victories across urban areas with high numbers of young and college-educated voters, and analysts say that could suggest a potential weakness for Donald Trump. So both his and Joe Biden's campaign teams will be looking at how they can attract those voters. Many of them are moderate Republicans or independents ahead of November's general election. In a statement, Joe Biden hailed his victories, saying, quote, "Millions of Americans have made their voices heard," and warning that Donald Trump is determined to destroy our democracy. If Donald Trump continues his winning streak, he could be declared the Republican Party's official presidential nominee as soon as March the 12th. In Washington, Kate Fisher reporting for DD India.
Well, it looks like Nikki Haley is done in terms of her race. We expect an announcement from her in the next couple of hours saying that she is suspending her campaign for the presidency. With that, I'll hand back to the studio in Delhi. Tanvi, a big day for politics here in Britain and in the United States.
Indeed. So what it was, a big Super Tuesday, we are expecting a happening Wednesday for you guys. Thank you very much, Ollie Barrett, joining us all from Westminster, London. You're watching DD India Global. On to more from Europe now. Russian President Vladimir Putin's foreign intelligence chief has said that French President Emmanuel Macron's refusal to rule out sending European troops to fight Russian soldiers in Ukraine was extremely dangerous and irresponsible. Asked about Macron's remarks, Sergei Naryshkin, the head of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, said that they were deeply irresponsible. Macron said last month that there was no consensus on sending European troops to fight in Ukraine, but that nothing should be excluded. The United States and other European members of the alliance, though, said that there were no such plans to do so. On to the German military audio leak. Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said on Tuesday that one participant on a high-level military call on Ukraine, intercepted by Russia, had mistakenly joined via a non-secure line, and German communication systems had not been compromised. Russia had likely intercepted the discussion among senior German Air Force officials by chance via widespread surveillance, Pistorius added, as he presented initial results of an investigation into the leak. A high-level military call on Ukraine, intercepted by Russia, made clear that no political decision on sending Taurus cruise missiles to Kiev had been made. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said on Tuesday on a trip to Sweden. Asked if the leak could affect the position of Gerhardt, who was not the one to dial in from Singapore, Pistorius said that he was not going to sacrifice one of his best officers to what he called, quote-unquote, Putin's games. The German government further accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of seeking to sow disunity and create divisions within Germany. The leak has nonetheless embarrassed Germany and prompted questions about its intelligence security. And to understand the fallout of this leak, we spoke to DW's Michaela Kufner from Berlin. Michaela, first, what were the military officers discussing in that sensitive conversation?
Well, the officers caught in that recording were actually discussing the specifics of how the Taurus weapon system that Germany at this moment in time is still not delivering to Ukraine because the German Chancellor doesn't want to send it, how that weapon system could be used on very specific targets, specifically a bridge that connects Russia with Crimea. Crimea is a Ukrainian territory that was annexed by Russia in 2014. And the Kremlin has made it quite clear that if this target was hit, that would be seen as a major provocation. So Russia made this public deliberately and is now selling this tape to its own public as Germany planning an attack on Russia, which is misconstruing what these officers were actually debating. They were debating different ways that weapon could be used, how targeting could be controlled without the involvement of German military personnel, because they all understood that this is a red line for German politicians, particularly German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who wants to prevent any kind of action and any weapons delivery to be seen by Russia as an involvement of Germany, which of course is a NATO country, in this war in order to avoid a further escalation. And we now also learned that it was due to human error that this recording could occur. It was a participant sitting in Singapore with an open line. And the belief here in Germany is that this was pretty much a recording that was caught by accident by Russia, but is now being used in what the German defense minister calls a communication war.
Kremlin has accused Scholz of not being in control of the situation and also said that this recording shows direct involvement of the West in the Ukraine conflict. How has Germany reacted to all this?
Well, Germany is adamant that this is not the case and that indeed there are no plans for Germany to have any kind of involvement. We saw the German Chancellor react to a comment by the French president when he refused to rule out that in the future there could be troops on the ground by a NATO country. The German Chancellor actually recorded an address to the nation following that particular comment and saying, as long as I am Chancellor, there won't be any German troops in Ukraine. This clearly is being ignored by the Kremlin, and there are segments being used from this recording to basically misconstrue what was discussed as Germany actually planning an attack. As far as the Chancellor not being in control, well, there's a lot of domestic wrangling right now, both within his government coalition, but also between the opposition, which is still hoping to see early elections. They are already in campaigning mode, although that doesn't realistically look like it's on the cards. And we did see a comment come from the Conservative CDU opposition describing Olaf Scholz as a security risk himself. This is all very damaging to Germany's image to the outside, both towards Russia, but also to some degree towards its NATO partners, because this really comes within a context of the German Chancellor not having been confident or not having been quiet enough about the inner workings of NATO.
And how is this affecting Germany's relations with its allies?
The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz let it slip, to say the very least, that there most likely are French and British troops on the ground in Ukraine to control the targeting of some of their own weapon systems. And Germany, or the German Chancellor, used this as an argument why he's not sending the Taurus weapon, which is seen as the most precise weapon. He also later mentioned that it could be used to strike Moscow. So this is also a question of trust towards Ukraine, using weapons only the way they are being discussed and not using them on Russian territory or to strike Russia really very much at the core. There is a risk essentially of World War III, which nobody really wants to debate openly. We know that Britain publicly really rebuffed the German Chancellor, disclosing that there are potentially British personnel on the ground. The French haven't been so public about this, but we know that there's also a degree of impatience on the French side. So there are really amends that need to be made within NATO, within the top leadership. But when you talk to the working level, they see this as the political workings that doesn't really affect how NATO itself operates. But what it does is it projects some kind of crack that isn't really necessarily there inside of NATO, but it gives Russia something to work with in its own propaganda. And that is what's being feared here most, particularly by Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, who's adamant that he won't sack any of the officers involved in that surveillance scandal because, as he put it, he won't play Russia's game. And that also counts for the political, let's call it, ripples that have been caused by the release of this recording here in Germany and further afield.
Michela Kufner joining us from DW Berlin. You're watching DD India Global. India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and his South Korean counterpart today attended the comprehensive and productive 10th India-Korea Joint Commission meeting in Seoul. Conversations covered expanded bilateral ties, cooperation in the field of defense, science and technology, business and trade, people-to-people exchange and cultural cooperation. They also talked about advancing trilateral cooperation. The two leaders also exchanged views on the developments in the Indo-Pacific region, convergences to challenges in the region, and regional and global issues of mutual interest. In his opening remarks, the minister called for deepening cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated India's first underwater metro rail service in West Bengal's capital city, Kolkata. The new metro line, called the Howrah Maidan Esplanade section, is India's first underwater metro transport. It passes beneath the river Hooghly, which separates Kolkata and Howrah cities on its east and west banks. The Prime Minister also travelled on this newly launched metro service. He interacted with students on the occasion. Students very excited to be with the Prime Minister here. The Indian Prime Minister also talked with the metro staff involved in this project. A huge crowd gathered at the metro station to greet the Prime Minister, where he arrived to flag off the Howrah Maidan Esplanade metro. Later, the Prime Minister addressed a women's rally in West Bengal's Barasat region.
कोलकाता की मेट्रो इस बात की भी गवाह है कि बीजेपी सरकार कितनी तेजी से काम करती है। 2014 से पहले के 40 सालों में कोलकाता मेट्रो का सिर्फ 28 किलोमीटर रूट बना था। आपको आंकड़ा याद रहेगा? मैं जो कह रहा हूं याद रहेगा? जरा आप बताएंगे तो पता चलेगा, याद रहेगा? 40 साल में 28 किलोमीटर, ओनली 28 किलोमीटर। जबकि बीजेपी सरकार के बीते 10 साल में कोलकाता मेट्रो का 31 किलोमीटर और विस्तार हो चुका है।
Still with India, members of the England cricket team, including Ollie Pope, Johnny Bairstow and batting coach Marcus Trescothick, met Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama in India's Dharamshala. It's India's hill town on Wednesday. The team is set to play the final match of the ongoing Test series against India, which begins on Thursday. And a special preview for you of the feast on offer for the 96th Academy Awards Governor's Ball. This ball revealed a huge number of mouth-watering delights. Hollywood stars can finally relax and chow down on some fine food on Sunday's Oscar night in the LA. So that's it in this edition of DD India Global. Do join us for another edition of the show at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja. From my entire team in New Delhi, thank you for watching. Namaskar.